Some of the worst financial decisions ever made were made by very smart people, not despite their intelligence, because of it. This is not a theory. It is a finding replicated across multiple disciplines: behavioral economics, cognitive psychology, and financial research, and it points to something that almost nobody discusses openly. Intelligence does not protect people from bad financial decisions. In several measurable ways, it makes them more vulnerable. The question is not whether smart people are capable of building wealth. The question is why so many of them do not. And the answer lives in a set of psychological traps that intelligence alone cannot escape. The first trap is the one that turns intelligence from an asset into a liability. Smart people are exceptionally good at rationalizing. When an average person makes a questionable financial decision, buying a stock at its peak, holding a losing investment too long, spending a bonus they did not plan to spend, they often recognize the mistake, at least after the fact. The recognition stings. That sting is useful. It is how learning happens. Smart people do not experience the sting in the same way. Their intelligence gives them something less useful than self-correction. It gives them self-justification. Research from psychologists studying cognitive dissonance has demonstrated for decades that people with higher cognitive ability are better at constructing convincing narratives to explain away poor decisions. They do not admit a mistake. They reframe it. A bad stock pick becomes a long-term strategy. A reckless purchase becomes an investment in quality. A missed opportunity becomes prudent caution. The intelligence that could have identified the error is redirected toward burying it. A study published by the National Bureau of Economic Research examining investor behavior found that high IQ investors were no less likely to exhibit common behavioral biases than their peers, and in some categories, particularly overconfidence and the refusal to sell losing positions, they performed worse. The researchers' conclusion was blunt. Cognitive ability, measured independently of financial literacy, did not protect against bias. It simply made the bias harder to detect. The rationalization engine runs quietly. It does not announce itself. It simply converts intellectual horsepower into financial inertia. The second trap has a name that appears in every introductory behavioral economics textbook, which is precisely why intelligent people assume it does not apply to them. It is called loss aversion, and it does apply to them. It applies to everyone. The foundational research, conducted by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, and later recognized with a Nobel Prize, demonstrated that the psychological pain of losing money is approximately twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining the same amount. This asymmetry is not irrational. It evolved for good reason. But in the context of long-term wealth building, it is devastating. Smart people feel loss aversion acutely because they think probabilistically. They calculate downside risk with precision. They model worst-case scenarios. And the precision of that analysis convinces them that avoiding loss is synonymous with making safe decisions. It is not. Avoiding the stock market to protect capital from volatility means accepting the guaranteed loss of purchasing power to inflation year after year without ever feeling the sting of a market decline. The loss feels different because it is invisible. The account balance does not go down, but what it can buy does. Research from Dalbar, the independent financial analytics firm, has tracked investor behavior against market returns for decades. Their data shows, year after year, that the average investor significantly underperforms the very funds they invest in. Not because the funds failed, because the investors moved in and out at the wrong times. They sold when markets fell and sat out the recovery. The fear of temporary loss created permanent loss. Keeping money in a savings account feels safe. It is not. The paradox of loss aversion is that the people most careful about avoiding risk are often the people most exposed to the slowest and most reliable form of wealth destruction. The third trap is less about individual psychology and more about how the environment remodels the brain. It is the scarcity mindset. And the research behind it fundamentally challenges the assumption that smart people should be able to think their way out of financial difficulty. Sendil Mullainathan, a professor of computation and behavioral science at the University of Chicago, and Eldar Shafir, a professor of psychology and public affairs at Princeton University, published findings that reshaped the understanding of poverty and cognition. They demonstrated that the experience of financial scarcity consumes mental bandwidth. Specifically, the cognitive resources needed for planning, impulse control, and long-term decision-making. The effects are large, equivalent to losing 13 IQ points, or to functioning after a full night without sleep. What this means is not that poor people are less intelligent. It means that poverty itself reduces the cognitive capacity that everyone, regardless of natural intelligence, relies on to make sound financial decisions. Someone experiencing financial pressure, even a smart someone, is operating with diminished bandwidth. The planning required to build wealth is precisely the kind of high-bandwidth activity that scarcity makes hardest. This creates a feedback loop that Mullainathan and Shafir documented rigorously. Financial pressure reduces cognitive function, which impairs financial decision-making, which deepens financial pressure. Intelligence does not break the loop. The loop consumes intelligence. The research makes clear that escaping this trap is not primarily a matter of willpower or rationality. It is a matter of reducing the cognitive load that scarcity imposes, often through structural changes, automation, default savings mechanisms, and strategies that bypass the depleted decision-making system entirely. The fourth trap was identified and named by Richard Thaler, the University of Chicago economist whose work earned a Nobel Prize in 2017. Mental accounting describes the universal human tendency to treat money differently based on where it came from and what it is labeled for, even though money, by definition, is fungible. A dollar is a dollar, except in the human mind, where it is not. A tax refund feels like found money. It is more likely to be spent. A bonus feels like a reward. It is more likely to be spent. An inheritance feels like a gift. It is more likely to be spent. The same amount arriving through a standard paycheck, which feels earned, budgeted, spoken for, is treated far more carefully. The dollars are identical. The labels change everything. Smart people are no less susceptible to mental accounting than anyone else. In some cases, they are more susceptible because they maintain more complex mental categories to organize their finances. A high earner with multiple income streams, salary, consulting, investments, side projects, may mentally tag each one with a different level of seriousness, a different level of permission to spend. The result is rigorous discipline in some categories and complete leakage in others, all without ever feeling contradictory. The money disappears in the gaps between the labels. Research from behavioral finance labs has demonstrated mental accounting effects repeatedly across education levels and income brackets. People who would never touch a retirement account for an emergency will carry credit card debt at 20% interest. The math does not justify the behavior. The psychology overrides the math. And the psychology operates beneath awareness, labeling, and sorting without ever seeking permission. The fifth trap is the most mathematically straightforward and the most psychologically invisible. It is present bias, the preference for immediate rewards over larger future rewards, even when the future rewards are dramatically larger. The behavioral economics literature refers to this as hyperbolic discounting. The future is discounted at a rate that no rational calculation would justify. $100 today feels worth more than $200 in 6 months. $2,000 next month feels more appealing than $5,000 in 5 years. The discount rate is steep. It is not based on interest rates or inflation or any objective financial variable. It is based on the architecture of the brain. Neuroscience research suggests a biological basis. Immediate rewards activate the limbic system, the older, more impulsive parts of the brain. Future rewards activate the prefrontal cortex, the seat of planning and deliberation. Present bias is literally the older brain outvoting the newer one. Everyone has both systems. Intelligence lives in the prefrontal cortex, but present bias lives deeper, in structures that do not respond to reasoned argument. It simply wants. It wants now. The prefrontal cortex can model the cost of that wanting, the compounding loss, the opportunity cost, the retirement that will not materialize. But the model is abstract. The wanting is immediate and concrete. And immediacy, across every study in the behavioral economics literature, beats abstraction reliably. The practical result of present bias is not dramatic. It is gradual. It is the investment account that gets started next year instead of this year. It is the extra money that gets spent rather than allocated. It is the discipline that always feels justifiable to postpone because the consequences are far away and the relief is right now. That is not intuition. That is a cognitive architecture working exactly as it evolved to work. The tragedy is that the modern financial environment, with instant purchasing, infinite scrolling commerce, and frictionless credit, is optimized to exploit it. The sixth trap may be the most seductive for intelligent people specifically. It is the belief that the future can be forecast with enough information and enough analysis. Smart people are information gatherers. They read, they research, they build models. And the more information they gather, the more confident they become in their predictions. This would be fine if the predictions were accurate. They are not. And the accuracy does not improve with more information beyond a surprisingly low threshold. Research published by Philip Tetlock, a psychologist and political scientist at the University of Pennsylvania, tracked expert predictions across decades. The findings became a landmark in decision science. Expert forecasters, even those with access to privileged information and advanced analytical training, performed little better than random chance on many categories of prediction. But their confidence in their predictions rose steadily with their level of expertise. More knowledge produced not better forecasts, but stronger belief in forecasts that were still wrong. Applied to financial behavior, the forecasting illusion is expensive. It leads smart people to believe they can time markets. They cannot. It leads them to believe they can identify undervalued stocks with superior analysis. The data from S&P's Espiva scorecards, tracking active fund manager performance against passive benchmarks over decades, shows that more than 90% of professional fund managers, people whose entire career is forecasting, underperform a simple index fund over a 15-year period. If the professionals cannot do it, the intelligent amateur who believes superior cognition will produce superior results is not operating on evidence. The forecasting illusion is not merely a mistake, it is a wealth transfer mechanism. Money moves from those who believe they can predict to those who understand they cannot. The transfer is silent, it is polite, and it is continuous. Each of these psychological traps, rationalization, loss aversion, the scarcity mindset, mental accounting, present bias, and the forecasting illusion, operates below the level of awareness. That is what makes them dangerous. The rationalization engine does not announce that it is constructing a story. Loss aversion does not declare that it is inflating downside risk. Present bias does not notify the prefrontal cortex that it has been overruled. None of these traps sends a notification. They simply shape behavior, quietly and continuously, and the result compounds across decades exactly like interest, but in the wrong direction. What escapes these traps is not intelligence, it is structure, automation, rules that do not require daily deliberation, automatic investment contributions that remove present bias from the equation, broad index funds that remove the forecasting illusion, fee transparency that removes the slow erosion of mental accounting. These are not sophisticated strategies. They are the opposite. They are simple systems that bypass the cognitive machinery that intelligence cannot override. Research from behavioral finance consistently finds that the investors with the best long-term outcomes are not the ones who think the most. They are the ones who have set up systems that require the least thinking. Simplicity, deployed early and maintained consistently, outperforms intelligence every time. Most of the conversation around money and wealth assumes that intelligence and education are enough. Know more, think harder, make better decisions. The data says otherwise. Intelligence equips a person with a faster engine, but does nothing to correct the steering. And a fast engine pointed in the wrong direction travels further before realizing the mistake. The psychological traps that keep smart people poor are not secrets. They are documented in decades of peer-reviewed research across behavioral economics, cognitive psychology, and decision science. But they are rarely discussed in the places where financial education actually happens. They do not appear in school curricula. They rarely surface in professional training. And so, generation after generation of intelligent, capable people work hard, earn well, and wonder where the wealth went. If this kind of financial clarity is the kind that most people never encounter in school, in their families, or in the conversations around them, then the most valuable thing that can be done with it is to pass it on. Sharing this video costs nothing, but for the person who watches it and recognizes even one of these traps operating in their own financial life, the rationalization, the loss aversion, the present bias, the forecasting illusion, The effect over a lifetime could be measured in hundreds of thousands of dollars that would have otherwise simply disappeared without ever being noticed. A like or a subscription is what keeps this education reaching the people who need it most. The traps exist, they always have. And now, for the person paying attention, they have names.